Hi friend, welcome to your sleep story. My name is Amir, and I'm honored to be the voice you hear before bed tonight. If you follow my channel regularly, you'll know that one of its main tenets is your safety, but I also want to make you smile as you go to sleep. For that reason, I've made a new series called Incredibly Dull History for Sleep, which tells stories in which not much happens. Tonight, we begin with the history of the spoon, which I've always loved and frequently prefer. A spoon to a fork, much to the surprise of my wife. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening tonight, what time you're comfortable, and let's have a relaxing session initially, which will continue until 10 minutes into the video. I will count down from 10 to 1. As I do so, let yourself relax and feel the support of the floor, the bed underneath you, or whatever you are lying on tonight. As you become aware of that support, see if you can also become aware of a deeper support that is constant, the support of the earth, our home beneath everything, to give you the ability to let go, release, and start saying goodbye to the day. If your eyes haven't closed yet, perhaps this is a good time to let them close. You're safe, so let my voice be your friend tonight and a source of kindness. You can rely on it to always lead you to safe places in this story or another, and you're growing more conscious now of that sense of security. See if it allows you to let go. After the day is over, whatever has happened or will happen will likely still be coming to mind. Rather of pursuing them, try to simply watch them go. Don't fight them. Instead, watch them go, like leaves on a moonlit river or clouds moving through a starry sky. 7. This is your time, and you deserve it. Let yourself enjoy it, and remember that everyone deserves to sleep. You should also become conscious of your body and where you might be holding tension. Your feet, lower legs, belly, hands, or perhaps you're like me and keep the tension in your face. Just let it all go. I can assure you that there is peace within you, and you can find it tonight. Just start letting go now and see if you can find that peace within yourself. It is there, waiting to be seen, heard, and felt. 5. As you get closer and closer to deep sleep, realize that you have nothing to carry, nowhere to go, and nothing to do. Let that fact help you rest more. 4. Maybe allow yourself to be grateful for the small things in life, like your shelter tonight, your breathing, and the people you love. 3. Start using your imagination. Now start looking at the spoon, whether it's made of metal, wood, or another material. You are about to embark on a journey through the history and world of the humble spoon. You will check in with your body once more. Your body has worked hard today. Now is the time to give. It rests and let go completely. As I tell you tonight's sleep story, Incredibly Dull History, the spoon is the least dramatic of all eating implements. It has no edge, no attitude, no prongs, points, or mechanisms, and it does not slice, dice, or twirl unless thrown. Instead, it is a quiet curve that has outlasted kingdoms and dynasty. Let's start without a bang, a battle, or a declaration of anything even vaguely exciting. We don't know the names of the people buried with them, but we do know that someone, somewhere, decided they were going to the afterlife with a spoon that says a lot. No spears, no drums, no flaming swords of glory, just a shallow scoop in that it has endured the fall of empires, the rise of forks, and the highly suspicious decade of the 1960s, when people tried eating everything with sticks. The oldest spoons known to exist are 20,000 years old or thereabouts, carved from bone and stone and discovered in graveyards. Even though early humans may have created fire, language, and cave paintings, they also created soup and, consequently, the spoon. Some of them were made of shell, which was a great idea in coastal areas until someone dropped one on a rock and realized that clam shards make awful cutlery, but the idea stuck. When spoon logic first emerged, it was a slow dawn with few people writing about it. Nevertheless, the spoons were already there, waiting patiently, as is their natural state. By the time the Egyptians arrived, they were well organized, lined, and completely preoccupied with the afterlife and eyeliner. They made spoons out of ivory, wood, and stone, and frequently adorned them with fish lotus flowers. These were used not only for eating, but also for mixing perfumes, medicines, and possibly things that shouldn't be mixed at all. One particularly fine spoon found in Thebes is shaped like a swimming girl holding a bowl above her head. It's lovely, elegant, and completely impractical. You'd never get through a stew with it, but if you were anointing a cat or embalming someone, it was perfect. The Greeks, as it turns out, weren't particularly enthusiastic. The Romans, on the other hand, took two spoons, like ducks to wine. They had two main types: the legular, a simple tablespoon, and the cochlear, which had a pointy handle for stabbing snails or olives. The cochlear was practical and was Roman. The spooners preferred using their hands, liked sharing, liked passing things from hand to hand, and liked licking olive oil off their wrists in ways that seemed perfectly normal at the time. Yes, I help you eat this soup, but I will also, if necessary, extract a mollusk from its shell. That's the kind of cutlery that creates empires. Now, let's take a quick look at the Hawken Hoard, which sounds like a pub quiz team, but is actually the largest Roman silver hoard ever discovered in Britain. It was found in Suffolk in 1992 by a man with a metal detector and a fairly upbeat attitude. It contained more than 30 silver spoons, many of which were inscribed. We don't know why the hoard was buried. Some claim it was to keep it safe from raiders, while others suggest it was hidden and then forgotten, which would be terribly Roman. All silver, no map. One person said, "Sisinus owns me." Another said, "Fooiness made me." A third said, "Nothing at all," but had the air of someone who'd seen things. The wonderful thing about ancient artifacts is that if you can't explain them, you just say ritual, use, and move on with confidence. This is how we ended up with entire museum rooms full of items labeled possibly a spoon or ceremonial object of unknown ceremonial purpose after the Romans left Britain in the early 5th century. Some archaeologists say this was for snails, while others say it was ceremonial, and still others say we have no idea. But let's call it religious and hope nobody checks. The Anglo-Saxons used spoons, but they didn't write love letters to them or bury them in golden hoards. Instead, they used wood, horn, or bone. One spoon, made of cuttlebone, was discovered in Kent and was placed in a woman's grave. It had no inscription or decoration, just a quiet little scoop. There was something quite charming about that. No one mentioned that it was a sacred spoon, but someone still held it in her hand. Meanwhile, far away, the Byzantines were becoming more ornate. The levita, a liturgical spoon, still used in Eastern Orthodox communion, was already in use. It was used to deliver both bread and wine in one motion, which is efficient and a little nerve-wracking. One sip too many, and you've had most of Lent in a mouthful. Their spoons were silver, sometimes gold, and frequently engraved with peacocks, saints, and architectural flourishes that made you feel vaguely guilty if you slurped too loudly. We come to the monks. Ah, the monks. If you were picturing solemn, brave men with spoons tucked into their robes, you were not mistaken. The nicer ones, made of wood or pewter, were saved for high-ranking visitors and abbots who had just finished an especially lengthy and punishing Lent. There is a surviving Peter spoon from Fountains Abbey in Yorkshire. It is simple, functional, and slightly shaped like a trout. It was discovered under the refectory's floorboards, along with 2 buttons, a ceramic chicken's head, and what might be the end of a broom. This is how monks vanish from history, not in fire or legend, but beneath a floorboard with a spoon. A somewhat dubious story is told about an Ayerson monk who became overly attached to his spoon. He was known as Brother Allen, or Allen of the bowl, and he started asking for the same spoon at every meal. He claimed that it sat better in his hand, stirred more cleanly, and made the lentil broth taste like distant pears. At first, the others made fun of him, but then he started polishing the spoon before meals, wrapping it in cloth. When it was discovered on his pillow, the abbot stepped in, took it away, and put it in storage. Brother Allen remained silent, but he started eating with his hands slowly and respectfully, as if he were still. It may seem dramatic for such a simple tool, but keep in mind that monks did not drink wine at feasts, go hunting, or quarrel over it. Years after his death, they discovered a spoon-shaped hollow worn into his robe's pocket, and next to it, tucked in the hem, was a small slip of parchment that simply read, "In this spoon piece." The spoon was, in some ways, the monk's last private moment of the day. It was a gentle indulgence, and in some orders, it had a name. However, in the kitchen rolls of a Benoit music, there is a margin note next to the word cacalium, and Sister Marie uses the name Henrietta. No one is certain whether Sister Marie was a cook, a guest, or a scribe who had a long day. It is true that ancient Greeks were not spoon enthusiasts in the way we might have hoped. Instead, they preferred their fingers or bread, or occasionally the fingers of others, especially at symposia where the food was shared and the wine flowed until conversation turned to philosophy or minor arm wrestling. However, there is Henrietta the spoon, saintly, serviceable, slightly bent. Let's put the monks aside for a moment and go back in time before we dismiss the Greeks. However, spoons did exist. They were typically small and found in archaeological digs made of bronze or silver. They were probably used for cosmetics or medicines rather than meals, which reveals something about Greek priorities regarding health, beauty, and communal hummus. One spoon, which was barely the size of a thumbprint, was discovered in a physician's grave in Delphi. It was engraved with what appeared to be a snake, or possibly a very nervous eel. Scholars disagree as to whether it was used for applying balm or measuring doses of powdered substance. The Romans, on the other hand, were a people who knew how to host a feast and take a nap in between sentences. As I believe I may have mentioned earlier, the Romans took spoons more seriously than the Greeks, but only because Roman banquets were elaborate, multi-layered affairs with meals that lasted 6 hours and guests lounging on couches while being fed delicacies like dormice. A good Roman eater would demonstrate skill by handling most food with their hands and bread, saving the spoon for sauces or whatever was still moving the spoon. In other words, it was not the main event, but rather the quiet understudy who was always ready and never demanding. Roman spoons were beautifully made. Some were made of silver, some of bronze, and some of bone. For the less extravagant, there are records of actual Roman farming manuals explaining how to feed your snails milk and wine to make them plumper before dinner. And of course, the spoon was the preferred tool for removing them from their shells. Now picture this. It's evening in Pompeii, and a Roman merchant named Publius is lounging in his garden, swirling wine and gazing at a small snail that is delicately poised in his cockler. He hesitates. The snail hesitates. The spoon waits as usual, and then Mount Vesuvius erupts. This is why we still have the spoon. If you ever find yourself in a Roman museum, and you should, they're beautiful, and there are a lot of serious people looking at broken pots. So go to the cutlery section and look for the spoons. They are often forgotten, but they are there, sitting quietly behind the oil lamps and fibulate brooches. Oh, let's go back in time a little bit. Let's go to the Renaissance, or Renaissance, if you're from another part of the world. This was a time of big ideas, bold discoveries, dramatic paintings, and an absolutely terrifying amount of ruffles. It was also when the spoon started to appear, not only in monasteries and medicine cabinets, but also in the hands of people who thought of eating as a performance. The fork was still controversial, but the spoon had earned its place. In Italy, spoons had curved bows, silver or mother-of-pearl handles, and a hint of ornamentation that made you feel slightly superior. In France, they were engraved with coats of arms, and in England, they were made with twisted handles and gold filigree. The Renaissance, for all its splendor, was a rather complicated time to sit down to dinner. One needed not only an appetite, but also posture, polish, and a highly evolved sense of restraint. By the 1500s, the aristocracy had transformed dining into a sort of theater tables with long servants and endless courses. Silver spoons were frequently given as gifts at baptisms or engraved with dates and names. If you could afford a complete set, you were doing very well. And although fingers were still widely used, the spoon had started to gain prestige, especially in France and Italy. If you were fortunate or unlucky, you might be invited to eat with nobility. You would sit in front of a bowl of soup with a spoon so beautiful that it dared you not to use it improperly. You see, Renaissance spoons weren't just curved pieces of metal. They were engraved, twisted, and frequently carved to resemble angels. There were rules about how to use a spoon, but they were rarely documented. These rules were passed down through whispers and glares. For example, avoid raising the spoon above eye level, avoid slurping, avoid scraping the bottom of the bowl, even if the soup was unfairly shallow, and, for heaven's sake, avoid holding it like a shovel. The Italian etiquette manual, written by Giovanni della Casa in 1558, suggests that one should eat quietly without making unseemly gestures, and hold the spoon as if it were an extension of modesty itself. This would have been wise counsel in France. Catherine de' Medici, who was originally from Florence, introduced Italian sophistication to the French court, which included the increased use of individual cutlery. She is also frequently credited with popularizing the fork and promoting more refined spoon etiquette. According to court documents, guests were expected to arrive at her table with their own utensils, ideally in a fitted pouch that might include a knife, spoon, and small pick for various unspecified tasks. There are records of courtiers exchanging spoons engraved with poetry or small Latin phrases, tiny declarations of love, loyalty, or gentle retribution. One Venetian merchant gave his rival a spoon inscribed with ut, ego requiem, which is Latin for so that I may boil you. The rival replied with a spoon engraved with the same phrase, which was meant to be humorous. These kits were called cadena, and they were worn on the belt like a holster for broth spoons during the Renaissance. As with many things, the Renaissance arrives in England and Ireland a little damp and irritated. In 16th century England, spoons had finally started to settle into the domestic drawer. The nobility used silver, the gentry used pewter, and the poor used wood. Nori me tangir, ni persals, do not touch me other than with seasoning. Their feud lasted 17 years and ended when they were both taxed into oblivion in wealthy homes. Although personal spoons were becoming popular, there are records of families commissioning sets of spoons with initials, crests, or even small rhymes on the handles. In rural homes, spoons were often shared during meals, and if you were desperate, a servant might hand you one with a cloth. It was understood that this spoon had a long, mysterious past. It had seen cabbage and had lived in many mouths. No one knows what happened to the silver spoons, but Lady Edith Devonish, an Elizabethan woman, is said to have had 12 of them. They were engraved with the following phrases: eat not too fast, speak not with food, praise the cook, even if you must lie. He who scrapes the bowl shall marry late, and one per spoon. In Ireland, my home country, things were a little different. While the English court was perfecting its etiquette, Lady Edith died at the age of 94. The spoons were rarely fancy, but they were personal. You did not take another man's spoon. You did not carve a new one lightly. And if your spoon broke, you did not take it. In the Annals of the Four Masters, there is a reference to a chieftain who carried a curic spoon, a spoon of the boat, used for stirring both porridge and seaweed stew. This spoon was lucky, or at least less unlucky than most other spoons. These spoons were typically made of wood, sometimes ash or blackthorn, carved by hand, and frequently passed down through the generations. The spoon was more than just a utensil. In rural 17th century Ireland, it was a part of the home, the hearth, and the day. It hung by the fire, sat in a drawer next to the salt, or was quietly nestled among dried herbs in the strange holy metal. The wood darkened with time, the bowl thinned, and the handle curved slightly to one side, usually from years of being pressed into thick barley porridge and stirred mercilessly. No, these were not decorative spoons. They were devoid of any accents, no carving or inscription, but they were loved. A spoon belonged to a person the way a dog might, and it went where they went, ate what they ate, and was never borrowed without discussion. There are mostly oral accounts of wakes where the deceased's spoon was placed in their hands or tucked into their burial garments because it felt wrong to separate them and because the spoon had earned its rest. Another lovely piece of folklore from Kerry County describes a woman named Maurice, Bilan, who asserted that her wooden spoon could predict the weather. If it sank in the stew pot, she said, it would be a fine day. If it sank, she said, Rain was coming, and if it disappeared completely, she suspected one of her brothers had taken it out back to stir pig mash. Mora's spoon had a knot near the top of the handle and a chip on one side, which she insisted looked like St. Bridget if you peered closely and used your imagination. She kept it hanging on a nail above the hearth and once turned down a suitor who said, "It may be worn, but it's never lied to me." Around this time, spoon sets started to appear in earnest, not matching by modern standards, but grouped by owner or occasion. A set of 12 spoons might be kept for guests, and a smaller set might be used for travel funerals. Century England was the era of silver hallmarks, careful weighing, and endless records about who owned what, when, and how much it was worth. Spoons were often listed in wills, sometimes with precise descriptions. One man left his nephew 24 silver spoons, the plainer said, and another left his niece the good spoon with the apostle on top and the cheerful bend. A minor nobleman with weak knees and strong opinions about teaspoons, Sir Thomas Herwood, kept a display cabinet of them in his home in Suffolk. He was known to corner dinner guests with lengthy speeches about the curvature of 602 versus 1614 handles. He once refused to sell a spoon bearing the arms of James I, even when offered a horse and a small cottage in Kent. Alternatively, some people, or rather fidgety ones, started collecting spoons. A local curate catalogued the spoons after he passed away in 1681, describing the collection as somewhat impressive but completely unnecessary. The Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths, which sounds like a guild of wizards, was in charge of regulating the markings on English silver spoons. The lion pant denoted sterling quality, while the leopard's head denoted London. A date letter was added for each year, so by 1650, your typical household spoon appeared to have been to a tiny but crucial tattoo parlor. Let's go back to France. In the late 1600s, to the grand and glittering court of Louis Couture, the Sun King, who famously said, "Let sim the state it is," and once threw an entire banquet just to prove that he could digest asparagus in public. Some people collected spoons based solely on their hallmarks, squinted at them by candlelight, whispered about fakes, and argued about whether the leopard looked smug enough to be authentic. These were the beginnings of what we now refer to as eBay behavior. While much has been written about Louis's fashion, architecture, and hair, not enough has been said about his exquisite silver. Yes, gold spoons, which were frequently adorned with fleur-crowned initials or scenes of mythical restraint, such as Diana refusing soup. At Versailles, table manners were warfare in disguise. Cutlery placement was code, and how one handled one's spoon could win favor or cause scandal. At Versailles, spoons served as status symbols in addition to being used for eating. For example, a spoon with your initials engraved on it indicated that you had been spotted as a hunted person, while a plain spoon indicated that you were hardly furniture. Spoons were a part of the etiquette arsenal, a tool, a signal, and a performance. One nobleman was reprimanded for holding his spoon in a manner more appropriate for ditch digging, and another fainted after dropping his into a bowl of food and splashing a marquee. The French were early adopters of cutlery as personal property, and a well-bred guest frequently arrived at dinner with their own utensils in a small embroidered case. These sets, known as nécessaire, contained a knife, fork, spoon, and occasionally a tiny instrument for, let's say, delicate grooming. It was said that the king himself, who reportedly dined in public so his courtiers could watch and feel intimidated, once refused to eat soup until a new spoon had been brought. By the time of Louis XV and Louis XVI, spoons had settled into more standardized shapes. The French raccoo period, with its curls and flourishes and unwavering love of detail, gave rise to spoons. These personal spoons were frequently gifts that a young noblewoman might receive from a suitor, engraved with a motto or a subtle plea: soup o'er. DWI Mirage Dima soup, today, marriage, tomorrow. Whether this ever worked or not is unknown. That appeared to have been created by bored cherubs during a thunderstorm. The handles were twisted, the bowls were scalloped, and some of them were so heavily decorated that it's hard to imagine how any soup survived the trip from bowl to mouth. Nevertheless, these were regarded as the theft of refinement, and guests praised the spoon's elegance, even though they completely missed their mouths. Those who dabbed their chins with embroidered napkins did so because they believed they were taking part in a slow and noble dance. Now, let's cross the channel again and arrive elegantly with little splashing. The spoon had evolved into an institution in Georgian England, a land of powdered wigs, polished silver, and dinner tables longer than most modern marriages. This was because there were so many King Georges in a row, and the spoon was no longer merely an eating implement or a christening gift. Rather, it was a social compass. The type of spoon you used, how you used it, and most importantly, where it was placed on the table, were all indicators to others about your breeding, your wealth, and whether or not you were likely to say something embarrassing about trade. A formal Georgian dinner could include 36 dishes and 3 courses, many of which came cold, confused, or in jelly. The spoons used varied. There were spoons for soup, cream, mustard, and egg, as well as the enigmatic marrow spoon, which had a long, narrow handle that was meant to extract well marrow. Just by knowing this, one could impress. It was whispered that one could embarrass themselves by using the mustard spoon for the syllabub. According to a letter found in a Norfolk estate archive, a young man once used a dessert spoon for hare pie and was asked to bring it to the servants' hallway until his actions were reflected. Now, the Georgians also enjoyed collecting spoons, but they didn't just treasure silver ones. They also displayed them in Gentile homes. If you were particularly wealthy, you might have a spoon rack with glass doors that were never opened. The spoons inside were purely ceremonial, like peacocks or parliament. In this case, visitors were expected to quietly admire these while sipping weak tea and acting as though they cared. You might also find a spoon board, a wooden panel with rows of small holes where the family's best spoons were slotted in like medals. Each spoon bore a hallmark, such as a lion, a crown, a date letter, a maker's mark, or a lion. This was the golden age of spoons, mass-produced, electroplated, boxed, collected, gifted, and engraved. Victorian England was a time of great seriousness and great silliness, often at the same time. People grieved for 7 years, then held jelly parties, wrote funeral poems in the morning, and attended musical teacup races in the evening. The society was very concerned with manners, order, and cutlery, especially cutlery that came in sets of 12 and gleamed needlessly and had separate drawers. The Victorians invented the idea of having too many spoons and insisting on using the wrong one as a social death. One etiquette manual, published in 1865, solemnly advised, "A dinner guest of standing will know that a round bowled spoon is not to be used for fruit, fools, or syllabubs." They also sold door to door and had spoons for breakfast, dessert, bonbonses, ice cream, mustard, caviar, jelly, and for reasons no one can completely recall, asparagus. For those fortunate enough to be unaware. A fruit fool is a mixture of whipped cream and mashed berries that resembles regret but tastes like childhood. A syllabub is similar but more jiggly and prone to collapsing under pressure. Both of these dishes require special spoons, but let's take a moment to discuss the topic of the pudding spoon. In Victorian England, pudding did not mean what it means today. It was a dessert that was served for every dessert. Plum pudding, the pudding spoon, which was used only for soft desserts and was not to be confused with the custard spoon, which had a shorter handle, or the compote spoon, which came with an almost criminal amount of flourish, had a larger bowl than a dessert spoon, but was slightly smaller than a soup spoon. It was so, its sponge, pudding, boiled, steamed, baked, drowned in custard, soaked in brandy, or filled with things that didn't deserve to be eaten, but somehow became traditional. In 1889, Mrs. Ethel Hubbington of Tunbridge, Wales, hosted a luncheon for her women's literary circle. Her niece, Agnes, was given the honor of serving syllab, and she did so with a mustard spoon. No one spoke, and the silence at the table was so complete that one could hear the syllab. Mrs. Hubbington later described the incident in her diary as a moment of quiet ruin. The following year, Agnes married into the clergy, and she was never seen at desert again. In the late 1800s, souvenir spoons were very popular. They were small, inexpensive, and completely useless. Some had the Eiffel Tower on the handle, while others showed Queen Victoria's face in full glow. Americans loved them. One man in Boston purportedly collected over 2,000 of them, most of which he displayed in his hallway. A baby was given a silver spoon, as they had done in the past, frequently engraved. A bride received a boxed set. A guest might be given a souvenir spoon from a trip to Harriet, complete with an enameled image of a mineral spring and the indication that one had voluntarily consumed sulfur water in parts of rural England, especially Devon and Norfolk. Spoons, despite their seeming simplicity, have long been believed to whisper secrets about fate. It was said that if a spoon fell to the ground during a meal, a visitor would soon arrive. If it landed face up, it was someone friendly. His daughter eventually sold them all to a dentist who appreciated the shapes and let us drift gently and without looking behind us into the realm of folklore and superstition, face down. Someone demanding sideways meant it was your sister. In Scotland, children were occasionally given a carved spoon to sleep with, especially during storms. One such spoon, which is kept in the Museum of Childhood in Edinburgh, has tiny notches on the handle that each say it was carved after a night without dreams. There is an old Irish belief, mostly found in County Clare and Mayo, that a girl who drops her spoon twice in a single day will be married before the year is out if she drops it 3 times. Nobody knows what happened when the notches ran out, but the child who owned it went on to become a teacher, which may have been a sort of destiny. What's more interesting is that there was a belief in some parts of Lancaster that if you stirred your tea counterclockwise, your spoon would steal your appearance. Of course, this is nonsense, but at least one man, Mr. Horace Blundeau, took it seriously. He sold his business, moved to Bognor Regis, and spent the rest of his life painting seagulls, despite the fact that his paintings weren't very good. The Welsh love spoon is one of the most durable and exquisite spoon customs in the world. It started as a simple, sincere courtship ritual that typically involved someone with a pocket knife, a lot of patience, and a lot of unsaid emotion. The idea was that a young man would carve a spoon out of a single piece of wood and give it to the woman he hoped to marry. The spoon was not intended for eating. Rather, it was decorative, symbolic, and frequently painfully detailed. The earliest known love spoon, which is kept in the National Museum of Wales today, dates to 1667. It has two bowls joined by intricate latticework, the meaning of which is still up for debate. Some say it means we are joined forever, while others say it means I had time. It may include hearts for love wheels, support locks for fidelity bells for weddings, and occasionally balls in cages that represented children or a general sense of future entrapment. The spoon had to say something the carver couldn't. It was frequently given without words. If she accepted it, you were in. If she returned it, well, let's just say it became a spoon for stirring paint in the shed. Some of them took weeks or months to carve. Mistakes couldn't be sanded out, glued back. Every curve, notch, and flourish had to be planned. There's a sweet and somewhat tragic story from Pembrokeshire about a love spoon carved by a man named Making, a living as a thatcher, effer. Glenn carved a spoon for a local girl named Caris. According to the story, it had hearts, a twisted stem, and two doves joined at the handle. However, before he could give it to her, another man offered her land and a three-legged pig, which was seen as a sign of wealth. Aoife refused to let the pig have the legs, so she gave it to Caris, who accepted it and kept it in a drawer for the rest of her life. Her granddaughter later donated the spoon to a museum, where it now stands with a little plaque that says he carved what he could. Love spoons were not only used for courtship, they were also occasionally given between friends or family during farewells. For example, a sailor leaving for sea, a son going to find work, or a girl entering service in a large house far away might have said, "I'm thinking of you, I remember you come back." And in at least one case that was documented, it said, "Don't marry that cooper in Breen, he's got a temper and strange shoes." However, that might be folklore layered on top of folklore, which is the best kind. Before we leave the realm of folklore, let's add a few last superstitions. Look what I did. Little beliefs that stick to spoons like syrup to a drawer. I apologize. In Yorkshire, it was once said that if two people were to argue over the same spoon in a single day, the solution was to walk backward around the kitchen while humming Dot in Brittany, a region of France with deep Celtic roots. There is a tradition of hanging a spoon above a newborn's crib, not for eating, but for protection, a curved piece of birch or ash to catch fire. In Cornwall, a spoon placed across the top of a teacup was considered a sign that the drinker was holding back a secret. It was also said that more than one spinster aunt had received a marriage proposal in this manner. Winston Churchill once remarked, "My tastes are simple. I am easily satisfied with the best." Let's move on to famous people and their somewhat fabricated associations with spoons. The bad dreams were changed before they reached the child, either once a month or after a particularly noisy night. Churchill ate luxuriously when he could, and this included silver spoons, although he was also noted for favoring according to valet accounts. He had a special spoon for his breakfast eggs that had a slightly deeper bowl and a thicker neck. If it wasn't arranged correctly, the entire morning's atmosphere could change. Was it superstition, habit, or just that he had discovered the ideal spoon and refused to return to war? In terms of eggs, he had strong preferences. Queen Elizabeth I, the first English monarch known to have owned a fork, was still very attached to her spoons. In 1572, she was given a set of silver Gilterly ceremonial spoons with apostle heads were later given at christenings. One featured St. John holding a chalice, while another featured St. Peter holding a key. These spoons were kept in her private dining room and were used during fasts and solemn meals. According to legend, she once turned down a particularly elaborate fork from Venice because it did not offend the Lord, though it's possible that she just didn't like spaghetti. Then there's Napoleon Bonaparte, who was not only short on his temper, but also, on one occasion, short on spoons while dining with several officers during his campaign in Egypt, and apparently became irate when his exquisitely crafted silver spoon, which he had brought from France, disappeared. Instead, he ate it with a piece of flatbread, declaring it the superior tool of the East. The spoon was later discovered in a saddlebag wrapped in maps, and his servant was rewarded for returning it undamaged. It now rests in a small museum in Corsica, though some people think it is a replica. The incident was documented in a captain's journal under the heading Cutlery Trouble, Alexandria. On a more artistic note, Virginia Woolf wrote about it in her letters and diaries. In her later years, she claimed that a spoon that belonged to her mother, a small, pearl-handled item that she kept on her writing desk, helped her think. It's unclear if she used it to stir tea or just to tap it against paper, but the spoon appeared in her correspondence as a charm, a totem of her childhood, and she once wrote in a letter to her sister Vanessa, "The pearl spoon is missing again, and with it, half my concentration." Later, it was discovered concealed within a Thomas Brown book in his household ledgers. George Washington recorded spoons as frequently as livestock, including the following: spoons, 4 of fine make 2 lost, by the river. Washington inherited several silver spoons from his half-brother's estate, most of which were engraved with initials and well used by the time they arrived in Mount Vernon. We'll leave that to the scholars. Whether the river snatched them during a meal or a relocation is unknown, but the loss was significant enough to be noted. We must also mention Albert Einstein, who was not particularly attached to spoons, but who is said to have eaten soup every day in his later years, often from the same bowl, using the same spoon in the exact same way. It is said that he would occasionally lose himself in thought while eating, the spoon pausing in the air as equations played behind his eyes. His housekeeper once said, "When he stops moving the spoon, the world gets stranger." This is possibly the most restrained example of early American spoon grief on record. The spoon remains inside the Einstein, back to the history of the spoon, and we move closer to the present. In the early 1900s, the middle-class cutlery drawer emerged, a relatively new invention. In earlier centuries, spoons were kept in racks, boxes, rolls of cloth, or in the actual soup pot because no one had time for formality after 6 hours in the field. Archives, it is a simple, German-made piece with nothing special about it, perhaps except that it once helped feed the mind that bent time. During the era of catalogs, modern homes, especially those in Britain, America, and parts of Northern Europe, started to place a high value on ordered matching sets and polished metal. For example, a 12-piece cutlery set from Postway, which came with a bonus cake fork, would arrive in a box so stiff and velvety that it felt like you were adopting jewelry. Now that the stainless steel spoon has arrived, let's take a moment to thank Harry Burleigh, a Sheffield, England metallurgist who in 1913 found a kind of rust-resistant steel while working on gun barrels. But that's history for you. He tried to create a weapon and unintentionally created the salad server. Stainless steel cutlery flourished in the 1920s and 1930s because it was strong, shiny, and needed little polishing, which thrilled housewives and appalled those who still held on to the tarnished dignity of silver. It also meant that spoons, which were once rare and special, became commonplace. A home may now have dozens of them, enough to lose them and forget their origins. In the meantime, the 19th century souvenir spoon craze in America continued into the 20th century with ever more creative designs. The Wright brothers received one spoon. Roosevelt received several. And there are spoons for state fairs, the moon landings, Las Vegas casinos, and the Titanic, though the latter was a little tactless in timing. Some people collected them, some gave them as gifts, and some people, like Mrs. Geraldine Nesbitt of Omaha, had a rotating display of more than 400 souvenir spoons, arranged in a spinning carousel. The First and Second World Wars altered spoon culture once more in Britain and Germany. Metal rationing caused many homes to return to using wooden spoons for eating as well as cooking, and soldiers frequently carried a single spoon with them throughout the war, echoing the past in a way that made it part of their equipment, like a helmet or a lucky charm. She called it the silver whirl of memories, and her children were not allowed to touch it. Her husband was not allowed to discuss it, and she left it to her dentist when she passed away. In hospitals, the wartime spoon became a symbol of comfort and care. From the 1950s onward, curved-handled feeding spoons were developed for people with disabilities or tremors, and heat-sensitive baby spoons appeared on the market for new mothers who were afraid of burning their children's tongues. Several veterans kept their wartime spoons for life. Some passed them on to their children, and one man in Essex reportedly insisted on using his trench spoon for every meal until he was 9'6". In the 1970s, a man named Uri Geller appeared on television and claimed to bend spoons with his mind. Millions of people tried it at home, and there were spoon parties, spoon workshops, and at least one incident where an entire cafe ran out of usable cutlery during a group meditation. Skeptics were not impressed, and magicians explained how it was done. Ergonomic spoons, which were said to mimic the natural shape of the human mouth, were rarely agreed upon. One reviewer claimed that his ergonomic spoon made yogurt feel like it had opinions. Scientists let out a long sigh, but Geller's effect endures today. If you mention the word spoon to someone in a particular generation, they might raise an eyebrow and respond, "Ah, the mind." By the end of the 20th century, spoons had made their appearance in space. On the covers of albums, in the hands of millions of toddlers who threw them across high chairs with the happy rage of tiny Vikings, and in political speeches by Winston Peters, who once used one to explain economic stagnation. We have followed the spoon from caves to castles, from monks to monarchs, from polished halls to plastic trays. We have watched it change shape, gather meaning, lose it, and gain it again in the quiet corners of everyday life. We have held it in superstition, ceremony, and habit in hand. The spoon, which was once a symbol of humility and sustenance, is now also an icon of convenience, design, and the universal human truth that no one knows where the good teaspoon goes when it disappears from the drawer, and the drawer closes again. So let's wrap things up. Maybe the reason the spoon has endured and been so quietly adored is that it never tried to be anything else. The knife was aggressive, the fork was combative, and the spork was well bewildered, but the spoon was happy to hold what it was given and carry it where it needed to go. It is, and always has been, a companion. It asks nothing, it sharpens nothing. Even now, in the bustle of contemporary kitchens and cafes, the spoon is still found in drawers, jars, pockets, stirring soups, scooping sugar, measuring, tasting, and tapping while waiting. It sits on saucers next to mugs, or balances on the edge of pans, disappears into lunchboxes, reappears in sandpits, and disappears in bags. It just comes, scoops, lifts, and returns like a faithful friend with a curved back and no opinion, and found again at the perfect time, and in spite of everything, it still matters. Maybe you have a spoon that you always reach for, not your best or newest, the one with the scratch or slight bend that feels more right than the others. It may not be made of silver or have any engravings, but it has stirred something good once or twice, and that is enough. So now, as you rest, think of all the spoons that have passed through hands, homes, and history wherever you are. They have been carved in caves, dropped at Versailles, buried next to a sleeping soldier, cleaned, dried, and put in a drawer. They have all done their jobs quietly, dependably, and beautifully. And now you can rest too, if you're still listening. Perhaps you've listened for a few evenings. Perhaps you're going to hear it again soon. But eventually tell me about your favorite cuisine to eat and about your favorite spoon. Good night, dear friend, dear friend.